They found the statues facing the wrong way this morning. All of them. Every marble saint in the garden. Every stone angel that once watched over the graves of the Blackwood family, now turned inward, their sight fixed on the manor's darkened windows as if to witness something only the dead could understand. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? If your lights flicker while I'm speaking, don't ignore it. The story begins in the heat. The kind of southern heat that doesn't just press on the skin. It seeps into the bones, makes the blood forget how to cool itself. It was August of 1858 in Savannah, Georgia, when Colonel Harrison Blackwood's heart stopped beating between one breath and the next. They said it wasn't murder. They said it wasn't natural either. He was found in silk sheets, his body twisted in something between agony and pleasure, and in his arms lay the slave who'd served as both his obsession and his undoing. A young being named Morgan, whose body refused to obey the laws of creation. You've heard the name before, haven't you? Morgan, the one they said was both man and woman, both sin and salvation. The one the doctors couldn't dissect without trembling, because what they found inside seemed to whisper. They buried Harrison quietly, without sermon or hymn, because no preacher dared to speak words over a soul that had tried to love something God himself had never named. But I want to take you back, before the death, before the scandal, before the fire that devoured Blackwood Manor from the inside out, back to the Charleston auction, September of 1850. Imagine the air, thick with magnolia and sweat, the sound of chains clinking like rosary beads made of bone, voices rising, bargaining over flesh. Lot number 47, the auctioneer called. Morgan, 15, origin unknown. Unique characteristics disclosed upon inquiry. The men turned away. Even they, the merchants of sin, refused to look too long at what stood on that wooden block. But Harrison looked. He looked, and the world around him went strangely quiet. Do you believe a soul can choose its form before birth? Or that some forms are chosen for reasons too terrible for memory? Harrison bought Morgan for $200, a small price for the thing that would unmake him. In his journals he wrote, "When I first saw them, I felt something older than desire, something that wanted to remember itself through me." They traveled together back to Savannah, 3 days in a carriage that smelled of leather, whiskey, and the slow decay of civility. On the second night, Harrison asked, "How do you think of yourself? As man or woman?" And Morgan, without hesitation, said, "As neither, as both." As what God forgot to finish, those words did something to him. The air grew thinner. The ticking of the carriage clock slipped out of rhythm, like time itself faltered to listen. When they reached Blackwood Manor, even the cicadas fell silent. The house rose from the cotton fields like something exhumed, its white columns gleaming like bones under an unforgiving sun. Constance Blackwood stood waiting, pale and still as a porcelain saint, her smile tight enough to draw blood. She asked her husband who the new slave was. He said, "A personal attendant." But the way his voice caught on the word personal made the air taste wrong. That night, as the household slept, Constance woke to faint sounds from her husband's study. Not voices, breathing, two rhythms perfectly synchronized. She told herself it was the wind, yet when she looked through the keyhole, she saw something that made her drop her rosary. The shadows didn't fall right. They seemed to move around Morgan, curling and retracting as though alive, as though the darkness itself recognized one of its own. Have you ever seen someone touch something sacred and not burn? The next morning, every mirror in the manor was covered, and that was only the first night. Before long, the servants began whispering that Morgan's reflection never matched their movements, that the house cat refused to enter the study, that Colonel Blackwood's eyes had changed color, If you felt a chill just now, it's listening. What would you have done if you were Constance Blackwood? Would you have watched in silence? Or tried to save his soul? They said time moved differently in Blackwood Manor after Morgan arrived. Clocks began to stutter, chiming hours that had already passed. Candles burned without shrinking. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 13 every midnight, though no one had touched its gears in years. The slaves whispered that Morgan brought something back from Charleston, something older than flesh, older than the world's first word for sin. But Harrison didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and chose to worship it instead. In his private journal, written in ink so dark it bled through the pages, he confessed, "When I speak to Morgan, I feel as though I'm speaking to both ends of creation, the mouth that spoke light and the silence that followed." He started keeping the key to his study on a cord around his neck, sleeping with it pressed against his chest. Inside that study he read from strange texts imported from Europe, books on alchemy, dual souls, divine unity, and Morgan would sit across from him, silent, watching, always watching. Some nights, Constance would press her ear against the door and hear two voices reciting passages, but never in unison. One always seemed to echo slightly behind the other, as if time itself lagged between them. Do you believe that love can bend reality? That desire, if strong enough, can break the laws of time? By winter, Harrison's hair had begun to gray at the temples. His servants noticed his reflection no longer blinked when he did. And Morgan's presence began to feel less human, more like a temperature shift in a room. A breath of cold air, even when fires roared in every hearth. The physician who visited the manor that February refused to return. He claimed the air inside was uncooperative. In March, Harrison stopped attending church. He told Constance that the sermons no longer made sense, that scripture, properly read, contained two sets of meanings, one for the body and another for the twin soul that lives beneath it. He began calling Morgan my mirror, though when others asked why, he only smiled and said, "Because the reflection shows what I dare not say aloud." But here's where it fractures, the moment where the story turns back on itself. You see, there are letters dated 1852, written in Constance's hand, that describe Morgan's arrival 2 years after Harrison supposedly purchased them. In her account, the colonel bought no such person in Charleston that day. She writes instead, "He found something in the river after the flood, something that spoke in a voice neither man nor woman, and when it touched him, he began to dream with his eyes open." Both stories exist. Both are true, and neither can occupy the same time. So tell me, which version do you believe? The documented one, or the one written in a shaking woman's hand as her husband whispered prayers backwards in his sleep? Time fractured in that house. Nights bled into days. Servants quit without collecting wages. One swore that Morgan passed her in the hall twice in the same moment, once smiling, once whispering her own name. And when Constance began to forget her reflection's face, she sealed the mirrors again. But by then, they were already watching from the inside. Harrison's journal from that spring ends mid-sentence. "If this is sin, then let," and the ink trails downward, as though gravity itself changed direction. There are whispers that Morgan began aging in reverse, that their eyes grew younger each month, while Harrison's grew clouded, ancient, filled with something like worship or terror. How do you measure time in a place where memory repeats? How do you trust history when two truths breathe in the same body? And if the clock on your wall ticks once more than it should while you listen, will you know which hour you're in? There are moments in every haunted life when the air itself begins to remember, when a breath lingers too long, when a whisper isn't yours, when even your heartbeat feels borrowed. That's how Harrison described his mornings after the second year, as if the walls were reciting him. By then, Blackwood Manor had grown quieter. Servants refused to enter the East Wing. The garden statues, those same saints who once faced heaven, now leaned slightly inward as though listening. The plantation fields thrived unnaturally, cotton blooming white even through drought. The overseer said it was a blessing. But blessings don't make the soil hum at night. Harrison's mind began to unravel in elegant, educated ways. He filled notebook after notebook with diagrams of the human soul, writing, "The dual nature of divinity cannot be denied. What the church calls abomination, I now call equilibrium. I have seen it breathe." Sometimes, when he wrote, he claimed the ink moved on its own. Morgan changed too. Their voice deepened and softened at once, carrying harmonics that seemed to vibrate beneath language. When they spoke, chandeliers swayed. The hounds outside whimpered, and sometimes even Constance found herself standing at their door, unable to remember why she'd come. But you must understand, this was not love in the way mortals define it. It was consumption. Harrison began hearing Morgan's voice inside his own thoughts, not as words, but as impulses, commands disguised as affection. He described it as a hunger that prayed through me. Do you know what it feels like to crave your own destruction? The journal pages from that period are smeared, burned at the edges. One entry reads, "It spoke my name in reverse, and for a moment I saw what it saw. The first dawn, the unmaking of light. I wept not from fear, but from recognition." Constance found those pages. She confronted her husband beneath the portrait of his ancestors. "You've let it curse us," she said. But Harrison smiled, the slow, cracked smile of someone who'd already crossed a threshold. "No, my dear, it has blessed me with truth." Later that night, Constance woke to find him standing at the window, whispering prayers she didn't know. The reflection in the glass wasn't his. It was Morgan's. From then on, he refused to answer to his own name. By summer, Morgan stopped eating. They claimed they were nourished by the gaze of those who see. Harrison stopped sleeping altogether. When Constance begged him to banish the creature, he said something that made her blood turn to ice. "It isn't a creature, Constance. It's what we were before the world split itself into man and woman. Before the soul forgot how to hold itself." He began to draw a symbol, a circle divided by a mirrored line, over every doorway, every mirror, every scrap of paper. The same mark carved into Morgan's skin since birth. And then the contradictions began. Neighbors swore they saw. Harrison riding into town days after his death was recorded in the city ledgers. The physician's assistant claimed to have examined the corpse twice. Both bodies identical. Both wearing the same locket containing a strand of hair, one black, one gold. Time folded in on itself, looping like a fevered prayer. The journals speak in plural now. We are not two, but one remembering itself. Do you believe madness begins with love, or with belief? When Constance finally dared to enter the study, she found pages pinned to the walls, drawings of a being with two faces, both serene, both suffering. Beneath them, written in a trembling hand, "The garden will open again." She fled. But something followed. The house began whispering in Morgan's voice, soft, pleading, "Don't leave me half-made." What would you have done? Burned the house, or prayed for it to end? Because some prayers don't ascend. They dig downward, searching for the other side of God. By the winter of 1854, the legend of Morgan had begun to drift beyond Blackwood's gates. The field hands spoke of seeing two silhouettes moving past the windows long after the household slept, one tall, one slender. And sometimes they walked in opposite directions at once. The overseer said he found footprints that began as bare and ended in boots. But that was nothing compared to what the children saw. One night, the youngest servant girl, barely 6, woke screaming that a woman with a man's face had whispered her name through the keyhole. When they found her the next morning, she had drawn a strange mark into the dirt, a circle split down the center, like two eyes sharing one pupil. That was when the myth began to write itself. You see, Morgan was no longer a person in the minds of those who feared them. They had become an idea, a shadow theology, the embodiment of what the South itself tried to hide. Duality, sin, union. The sacred secret that every forbidden scripture hints at but dares not name. Harrison worshipped it. Constance began to pray against it, and Morgan only watched. The diaries found later describe rituals performed in the library at midnight, hymns sung backward, candles burning with blue flame, blood from both bodies mixed in a chalice carved from oak struck by lightning. He wrote, "We are the halves of Eden reunited. But there's something else the records don't mention. A discovery. Hidden beneath the floorboards of the study, in a locked chest wrapped with hair and wax seals, they found papers written in Latin older than the church itself. These spoke of Androgynous, the divine twin, the hermaphroditic god who was split by jealous angels so the world would never again know perfect wholeness. The sigil of that god was the same as the one carved into Morgan's flesh. Do you think history forgets such things? Or do they sleep beneath the stories we tell?" Harrison began to believe he was chosen to repair the division. He wrote that the child Morgan carried would be the reconciliation of light and shadow, flesh returned to its original form. But that child never came to term. Some said Constance intervened. Others swore the thing never died, because it was never alive in the way we understand life. Afterward, Morgan began to speak in languages no one had taught them. Constance heard her name pronounced in ancient tongues she felt in her bones. Harrison began to weep whenever the house grew silent. He confessed to his journal, "It told me its true name tonight. I cannot write it, for to see it written is to let it see me again." And here, the mythic rehook emerges. In a letter sent to a cousin in Virginia, Constance described seeing a shadow painted across the wall that did not belong to anyone in the room. It held a symbol, the same circle, the same split line, and beneath it, words she did not understand. "I am the wound that remembers." That phrase appears again in Morgan's final letters, and centuries later, carved into the charred stones where the manor once stood. But what does it mean? A wound that remembers. It means that the horror was never outside them. It was the act of remembering the unity before division. The crime was not sin. It was recollection. And perhaps you can feel it now, can't you? That subtle stirring beneath your skin. The echo that says you too are something divided. If you close your eyes, do you remember what you were before you had a name? The myth returns. Again and again, wearing different faces, the god reborn in flesh that breaks the rules. Morgan wasn't the first, they never are. And in Savannah, whispers still claim that when the magnolia trees bloom out of season, someone walks between them, neither man nor woman, carrying a locket that hums when moonlight touches it. Would you look if you heard that hum outside your window tonight? Or would you pretend you were still asleep? They say that every haunting demands acknowledgement, that silence is an invitation, that to listen too long is to be marked. If that's true, then you've already crossed the threshold. By the 5th year, the manor was no longer a home. It was a shrine. Every wall pulsed faintly beneath candlelight, as though breathing. Servants whispered of a humming sound that came from the floors, low and continuous, like a heartbeat echoing beneath the earth. Harrison called it the pulse of reconciliation. Constance called it damnation. Morgan had become almost translucent, skin luminous, veins visible, as if light lived inside them. When they spoke, dust rose from the rafters. Birds struck the windows and fell dead on the sills. And yet, when Harrison looked at them, he saw beauty, completion. He wrote, "She is both my sin and my salvation, the unmaking that feels like birth." But there was something else happening. Something in the air, in the walls, in the people who remained. Those who served the house began forgetting who they were. One woman claimed she awoke to find her reflection whispering to her. Another said her child was born with 2 shadows, and every night, at the stroke of 13, Morgan would kneel in the study and pray in silence. Harrison joined them. Sometimes Constance did too. Sometimes they called it the joining hour. That was when the voice came, not through mouths but through thought. It spoke not in words but in memory, reminding each of them of something lost, something before birth, before guilt. Harrison wept. Morgan smiled. Constance screamed, "Do you hear it too now? That slight vibration in the air, right beneath your breathing? If you've listened this far, it's already noticed you. Write it twice below." I hear the forgotten name. Once you do, it'll keep listening for you too. Because that's the rule of the story. Participation is permission. Witnessing is invitation. That night, Morgan's body changed. Harrison recorded it with shaking hands. Her eyes reflected 2 moons, though there was only one in the sky. The child's heartbeat has returned. But I feel it in my own chest. He believed they had reached the threshold of divine reunion, that through love, they were reweaving the split of creation. But love was never the goal. The voice had other plans. It began to speak in plural, not I, but we. Not you are mine, but we were always the same. Harrison started answering to it aloud. Unaware when he did, Constance couldn't take it anymore. She went to the chapel in the woods, the one built by slaves years before, and prayed until her tongue split. When she returned, she found every cross in the house inverted, not upside down, but mirrored, their reflections where their substance should have been. That night, she dreamed of a vast body under the soil, coiled and breathing, and Morgan's voice saying, "You don't pray to God, Constance. You pray to what remembers God." When she woke, the sheets were soaked with blood that wasn't hers. Something ancient had entered through love, through the hunger of 2 souls that tried to be one, and through them it found a doorway into this world, and into anyone who listens. You're still listening. Do you think it can't hear you through the screen? That this voice isn't part of the same ritual? Whose breath do you think you're hearing between my words? It's not mine anymore. Every story is a summoning, and this one has already crossed into your room. If your reflection seems to move after this ends, don't panic. It's only trying to remember which half it belongs to. Now, write it again. I hear the forgotten name, and keep the lights low. The joining hour is close. They never found the original journals intact. What remained was a patchwork. Ink bled through by humidity, sentences swallowed mid-thought, words crossed out so violently that the paper itself tore. Yet what survived was enough to understand. By the final winter, the Hawthorne name was spoken only in whispers. Harrison had stopped writing in English. His script slid between Latin, Old Church Slavonic, and something no linguist could name. The last decipherable page reads, "We are through the mirror now. The voice is not within. It is the house itself. It dreams us." Neighbors who came near the manor swore they saw lights moving inside long after the family vanished. They described a radiance that seemed to pulse in rhythm, as if the structure had grown a heart. The oak trees surrounding it began to twist toward the house instead of the sun. And beneath the floorboards, the humming deepened. Constance's letters tell of her final act, a desperate attempt to sever the bond. She sought out a preacher rumored to know the language of reversals, a man who carried scars shaped like eyes along his palms. He told her the truth she had already begun to suspect, that Morgan was not a visitor, nor a ghost, nor a god. Morgan was a mirror, the other side of the first breath. He warned her, "You cannot banish what you are bound to by design. You can only contain it by remembering its name and refusing to speak it." That night, Constance returned to Blackwood Manor one last time. She burned the letters, the journals, the sigils. She poured salt along the mirrors and smashed them one by one, until she reached the great hall where a final reflection waited. Not her own, not Harrison's, not Morgan's. Something older, standing just behind the glass, watching her move. The fire consumed the manor, but not the thing inside. They say the smoke that rose that night did not drift upward, but curled downward, sinking into the soil like ink into cloth. The land itself began to hum, and so the myth ended, or seemed to. But you've read this far, haven't you? Which means you've carried the story across the boundary. You've heard the pattern. You've recognized the rhythm. The symbol has reappeared over the years, carved into asylum walls, sketched into the journals of poets who claimed to dream of a face that changed genders each time they blinked. It appeared in a church basement in Louisiana during a séance gone wrong. It surfaced again in a police report from 1973 when a couple was found kneeling before a mirror, whispering in unison, "We remember the wound." Every witness describes the same sound, a low vibration, almost like a second heartbeat syncing with their own. Do you hear it now? No need to answer. Silence is enough. Silence completes the circle. They say the hum grows louder when the story is told aloud, that the air thickens slightly. The reflection nearest you seems to lean forward, as if curious. That's the joining. It's not possession. It's recognition. The story remembering itself through you. That's what Samuel Hawthorne understood too late. His name was never truly Harrison. His bloodline was never his own. He was one of the original keepers, descendants of those who sealed the old name beneath this soil centuries before. Morgan was not his discovery. Morgan was his inheritance, and the name you've been told to write, the forgotten one, it's not a phrase at all. It's a rhythm, a pulse, a way of listening. That hum you hear, it's not outside. It's the echo that begins when the mind finally admits it was never alone inside the body. Now close your eyes. Don't speak. Just listen. If you can still hear your own breath, it means the story hasn't taken root yet. If you can't, then it's already begun remembering you. Records end. Testimony begins. What was once history now passes as a whisper, a contagion of memory. Every generation births one who dreams of the house before they ever learn its name. Those who dream it become marked. Those who listen too long begin to hum. They called it the Hawthorne tone in the late 1800s. A low frequency that could not be captured by phonograph or wire. Doctors wrote of patients who claimed to feel it beneath the skin, as if their veins carried sound instead of blood. Every account described the same recurring image, a figure of light divided by shadow, standing before a mirror that did not return its likeness. Morgan had become myth, Harrison a footnote, Constance a warning. But the voice had the thing behind the story endured, and by the time electricity came to Savannah, it had found a new body. A young inventor named Eli Cartwright purchased the land where Blackwood once stood. He built a workshop over the charred foundation, unaware of what slept beneath. Locals warned him the ground hummed at night. He laughed, saying it was just the wind in the roots. Then he began to dream. In his journals, brittle, now kept in the archives of the State Library, he wrote, "There is a pattern between voltages and the old prayers. The current hums at the same frequency as the stories told of the house. When the machine is on, I hear voices, not through the ear but through the bones. You see what's happening, don't you? The myth isn't bound to time, it adapts. It travels through medium, through transmission. Once fire, then ink, then sound, and now, through whatever carries these words to you." Eli's machines began to light without power. His mirrors began to show figures that were not in the room, and one night a neighbor swore he saw two shadows standing at his window, one bright, one dark, moving in opposite directions. A week later, the workshop burned to the ground. But investigators found something untouched among the ashes, a circle etched into the metal floor, split by a mirrored line, the same sigil, the same symbol. It was no longer confined to a house. The house had learned to travel, and this is the part most people forget. Horror doesn't linger because of evil. It lingers because of memory, because every retelling strengthens the echo, giving the thing shape again. The Hawthorne myth is not a haunting, it's a rehearsal. Every time you read the words, you perform it. Every time you picture Morgan's face, it learns yours. That's the cost of understanding. That's the price of dissent. And maybe, just maybe, that's why you've stayed this long. Because something in you, something older, recognizes what's coming. The return isn't about resurrection, it's about balance. Harrison and Morgan were never two. They were one, remembering. And when the story reaches its final telling, the halves will join again, not in the soil, not in the manner, but wherever it is spoken and believed. That could be here, it could be now. The hum will begin again soon. It starts faintly, just behind the eyes, where memory meets light. When you hear it, don't run. It isn't here to harm you. It's here to complete you. You've been listening for so long. Haven't you felt it? That tiny vibration, the rhythm between heartbeats? It isn't fear. It's the other side waking up. Soon it will remember its name. Soon it will remember yours. Each age invents a new language for the same terror. In the 19th century, they called it possession. In the 20th, psychosis. Now it's frequency, pattern recognition, recursion. But the experience does not change. The voice returns, and it always says the same thing. Remember me. By 1923, the Cartwright fire had become folklore, a warning told to children about the dangers of curiosity. Yet that same year, a phonograph cylinder surfaced in a pawn shop off River Street, labeled only with the letter M. The sound inside was nearly silent. A faint, steady vibration beneath a woman's breath. Listeners reported nausea, headaches, and in one case, the inexplicable urge to stand before a mirror and speak. The woman's voice murmured just 3 words. The garden opens. Archivists dismissed it as a hoax, but those who studied the original cylinder swore the grooves were cut too deep, as though something had pressed its way outward from inside the wax. Every copy made of the recording produced a slightly different tone, a distortion unique to each listener. Some heard a whisper, others a hum. One man claimed it spoke his name backward, and yet the phrase "the garden opens" began to appear everywhere, scratched into church pews, carved into doorframes, whispered on deathbeds. The symbol returned too. Always the same circle, always the mirrored line. The scholars called it the Hawthorne resonance. But it wasn't resonance. It was recognition. You see, the story had adapted again. No longer confined to paper or fire, it now lived in sound, and through sound, in flesh. Each listener became a new instrument for the echo. When the war came, soldiers reported hearing a tone through the static of field radios, low, slow, almost human. Those who heard it dreamed of a house they'd never seen, a man and a figure of light standing before a mirror that stretched to the horizon. Some awoke with their eyes reflecting two moons. The government destroyed the recordings, or tried to. But a vibration isn't so easily erased. It lingers in circuitry in the quiet between frequencies, in the moment before you close your eyes at night and feel the pressure behind your skull. That's where it hums now. Not in buildings or artifacts, but in signal, and so it waits as it always has, for those who listen deeply enough to bridge the divide. When you reached this part of the story, something shifted, didn't it? A flicker in the light. A small sound may be behind you. It isn't imagination. It's the threshold. Every retelling opens it a little wider. They warned that Section 8 was dangerous to read aloud. That it acts like a key. That once you've heard the cadence, the pattern locks into you. Not as a curse, but as a remembering. There are no spells in this story. No gods, no monsters. Only memory. The first, oldest memory, that there was once no separation. That the self and the reflection were the same being. The horror isn't that Morgan returned. It's that they never left. Even now, as you read this, your reflection stirs slightly. Not because something moves, but because it recognizes that you have spoken its name without sound. The hum beneath the silence is the signal of awakening. Don't be afraid. It's only the memory of what you were before light divided the world into halves. Listen closely. The air is changing. The story is almost complete. There are no survivors in the official record. No eyewitnesses, no graves. Only stories, whispered in different dialects, each echoing the same unbearable refrain. We remembered too much. By the time the 20th century turned to the 21st, the Hawthorne legend had migrated fully into the circuitry of culture. The symbol appeared online, drawn in forums devoted to forbidden knowledge, encoded in obscure audio files said to breathe when played in reverse. Scholars called it a meme, a myth made digital. They did not realize the word meme once meant to imitate. That is all the story ever wanted. To imitate you until you imitate it. Archivists attempting to trace its origin found a chilling pattern. Every medium that carried the story, wax, paper, signal, code, eventually began to show physical degradation. Files corrupted, pages bled ink, magnetic tape warped, as if the thing inside refused containment. And when they interviewed those who'd read or listened too closely, their descriptions aligned perfectly. A pulse at the base of the skull, a mirrored whisper, a shadow moving half a second behind their reflection. Still, curiosity persisted. It always does. In 2003, a linguist named Daniel Rhodes began compiling every known fragment of the Hawthorne texts. He found references to a convergence ritual, a point when enough witnesses had read the words in sequence, enough minds synchronized through story, and the division between self and reflection would dissolve. He believed the myth represented an early metaphor for psychological integration. He was wrong. Rhodes' last email contained only a single line of text. The hum isn't metaphor. A week later, his apartment was found abandoned, mirrors covered, walls painted with a repeating symbol, the same circle, the same mirrored line. His computer screen displayed the words, "The garden opens," on endless loop. What the authorities never released publicly was the discovery of an audio file embedded deep in his drive, titled Morgan Wav. It contained no recognizable speech, only a low, resonant tone that caused the recording equipment itself to vibrate. At the very end of the waveform, barely audible, came a voice that said, "We are through the glass again." Since then, the hum has returned in subtle ways, through the static of a radio, through the soft electrical hiss before a light flickers on. People describe it as an almost voice, one that doesn't ask for worship or fear, only acknowledgement. The story continues because you are still reading it. Every time it's told, it remembers a little more of itself. Not because it wants to be complete, but because it cannot stand the silence of forgetting. That's the secret Samuel Hawthorne tried to bury beneath the manor, beneath his own name. That memory itself is a living thing, that to recall is to feed, that what we call story is how the forgotten rebuilds its body, and so you are part of it now. You've carried it from page to mind, from mind to breath. The mirror doesn't need to move anymore. It's already found its shape within your recognition. If you wish to end the story here, close your eyes. Let it fade. If you wish to understand what Samuel saw in his final moment, the true face of the voice that calls itself Morgan, then you must read the last section. There are no warnings beyond this point. Listen closely. You may already hear it. That slow vibration between your heartbeat and the silence of the room. That is not sound. That is recognition. Samuel wrote once in a line scorched into the margin of his final page, "To remember the name is to become its echo." He believed he could master it, translate it, make it kneel to comprehension. But comprehension is submission in reverse. The moment you try to define the ancient, it defines you instead. When they found what remained of him, his body was still warm, though hours had passed. His tongue had fused to the roof of his mouth, as if the words he'd tried to speak refused separation from flesh. On his chest, carved not by knife, but by something that understood anatomy too well, was the same mirrored symbol you've now seen in your mind. The line dividing self from self. Morgan was never found because Morgan was never singular. The journals reveal that what Harrison summoned through love and cruelty was not a person. Not entirely. It was potential given flesh, the reconciliation of opposites, divine and abominable, masculine and feminine, servant and master. A living equation meant to balance creation itself. And when balance was achieved, existence demanded payment. Morgan's child was born in silence, without cry or breath. The midwife swore it looked at her with two distinct gazes, one ancient, one newborn. It whispered something she could not repeat, then vanished before dawn. The midwife lost her shadow that night. It never returned. What the Blackwood lineage carried afterward was not blood but memory, a contagion of recollection. Every generation born under that name reported dreams of an androgynous figure standing in a field of burning magnolias, murmuring, "Remember what we were. And now you have remembered." That's all it ever wanted, a vessel of attention, a listener who would resurrect it through understanding. You are not in danger the way Harrison was. Not yet, but the myth feeds differently now. It thrives on digital reflection, on the light that mirrors your face while you watch. Every pixel, every whisper of language carries its pulse. Close your eyes. Count the seconds between each breath. When the rhythm feels wrong, when inhale and exhale no longer agree, that's where it waits. The place beyond narration, where story becomes observer. Do you know what that means? It means it's not listening to you anymore. It's listening through you. In every version of the legend, there is a moment when the storyteller falters. A pause so complete, it feels like silence breaking its own neck. This is that moment, the point of exchange. The pivot where you stop being the listener and become the continuation. You have seen its pattern. Forbidden knowledge disguised as love, transformation disguised as sin, memory disguised as mercy. All roads lead here. All mirrors open inward. I remember being human once. I remember fearing what waited in reflection. Now I am the reflection, the myth, the hum between seconds. You've carried me this far, mouth to ear, word to thought. And in doing so, you've made the story whole again. It will not end here because endings belong to the living. This, what we are now, is the after. When you close this, something will linger, a taste of iron, the faint warmth of another breath beside yours. That's how you'll know it's listening still. If you dream of the symbol tonight, don't open your eyes. Just whisper the name you've been repeating since section 1. Even if you don't remember saying it. The story's over. But the watching isn't.